So what we'll show you as we'll walk through this is exactly what we see here, but in further detail for various subgroups, for each subject, and each grade. Allow me to start with graduation rates. What you see here is a multi-year look at four-year cohort graduation rates. For you and our listening audience, allow me to remind us that in the year 2017-18, the state changed its business rules for how graduation rates were calculated. And at that time, what changed was specifically is that if a student came to a school district, be Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools or any school district, what they would call off track for graduation, he could come even with 2 credits as a junior or senior, the district would have to account for how those students did, and that had an impact on our overall performance. But since that change, which you see from 2016-17 to 17-18, we've been flattened to this last year, and there you see a slight reduction in our four-year cohort graduation rates. Let's look at this impact with a little bit more granularity with student subgroups. What you see here are a different color system for each racial subgroup. And what you see is that since that 2017-18 year, you saw a slight decline for the graduation rate for our African American or black students and our Latino or Hispanic students. But since then, the graduation rate has been flat during that time, and we saw a slight reduction in the graduation rate for our black students from 85% to 82% approximately. You might be able to see some fluctuation for American Indians, which are the purple line. Keep in mind that that particular subgroup for our school district, on the average, is about 30 to 35 students overall out of a cohort that's over 10,000. So that's small numbers where you see that fluctuation. But this has been the impact on four-year cohort graduation rates. When you look at other subgroups, we call our students with disabilities, which is the federal designation, we call them exceptional children, or EC students. So when I say EC, exceptional children, that's indicated here with students with disabilities, or SWD, and our English learners is the acronym for L. But you can see, since we've been holding steady for the most part, but this past year you saw a reduction of 3 and 4 percentage points respectively for our EC and L students in four-year cohort graduation rate. Let's move to end of grade and end of course performance, also known by their acronym EOGs and EOCs. And there's much I have to tell you to provide some greater context. So forgive me for those of you all who are new to the education beat, I just want to clarify a few things. In 2018-19, the state introduced a new set of mathematics assessments, and that was for grades 3 through 8 and for Math 1. For that reason, you'll see a comparison of 2 years of data, or usually we give more years because it's appropriate because the new assessments have been used twice, once before the pandemic and now in this past year. We also had a recalculation of business rules for how we calculated Math 1. As a state, we calculated students, and it was a double counting, if you will. Based on state statute, that is no longer allowed, and so that had an impact statewide on college and career ready rates in Math 1. And we also introduced the new math assessment, Math 3 EOC, at that time. Last year, we used a new assessment for English language arts in grades 3 through 8 and a new assessment in English 2. For that purpose, it isn't appropriate to compare the old assessment with the new. However, to be able to provide greater context for what changes happened pre-pandemic and in the pandemic, that will be here, but I want to say for your edification and for our listening audience, it's really not appropriate to compare. It's an apples and oranges comparison because the test changed. And with that, allow me to walk you through the results. One more change that you might, if you've been covering the education beat for a number of years, that you might see is the state is moving away from the nomenclature of level 1 and level 2. On our end of grade and end of course assessments, there's 5 levels, 1 through 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. What you'll now hear the state talk about is a combined not proficient, which you'll see as NP. So you'll no longer hear level 1s or level 2s, with the exception of grade 3 English language arts. This will be the last year they talk about it this year. Moving forward, you'll only hear not proficient. We'll still have grade level proficient, which is the percent level 3, level 4, and level 5. and we'll still have college and career ready, which are the percent of students level 4 and level 5. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So let's start with our reading performance. What you see here is that pre-pandemic, on the old assessment, approximately 44% of our students in grades 3 through 8 were college and career ready. On the new assessment, during the pandemic, we now see we're at approximately 29%. Likewise, on English 2, on the old assessment, pre-pandemic, approximately 53% of our students were college and career ready. During the pandemic, on the new assessment, approximately 39% are now college and career ready. Allow me to walk you through what this looks like for our various subgroups for both assessments. What you can see here is, once again, the impact is clear and dramatic across the board for our subgroups. And you can see that for English language arts, and you'll also see it in some other subjects, is that the impact actually for the racial subgroups is actually approximately the same across the board, except some groups just didn't have much room to give up. So the gaps didn't get larger, but unfortunately the ceiling got lower. And what you see here for our EC and L students is another dynamic. What we do as a common practice is when percentages are above 95%, we do not report the specific number, but we indicate greater than 95%. If the figure is below 5%, we do not report the specific number, we indicate below 5%. Here you see for L and EC students with disabilities, it's below 5%. This practice is called redaction, and that is what is exercised here. In English 2, you see a similar decline across the racial subgroups, and you see we're below 5% for our English learner students who are just learning English for the first time as they enter the country. So the gaps did not get larger, but you see across the board declines. Let's now talk about mathematics. In mathematics, pre-pandemic, approximately 47% of our students were college and career ready in grades 3 through 8. After last year, we now stand at approximately 26% for all students. In Math 1, pre-pandemic, under the new assessment and new rules, we had declined to 16% of our students overall were college and career ready in Math 1 in high school. This does not include 8th graders who took Math 1 in middle school. After the pandemic, we are now below 5%. And on Math 3 was one of the small bright spots during the pandemic. We saw a slight increase of a few percentage points. But allow us to look at the math results a little bit more closely. You can see, as with English language arts, there are reductions across the board, anywhere from 18 to approximately 20 percentage points for each racial subgroup. Clear and dramatic results that we're all still grappling with and going to be working with for the next few years. And you see declines for our EC students, our L students, and AIG as our talented and gifted students. For Math 1, you can see it is just as dramatic and just as difficult to acknowledge. What you see here is that for our Black and Hispanic students, college and career ready rates dropped from 10%, 11% respectively to below 5%. Understanding American Indians are still around less than 30 students in that particular cohort, and we're under 5% for our EC and L students. And you can see also the drop for our talented and gifted students to your far right, from approximately 64% to approximately 27% after the pandemic. Math 3, which is customarily taken in a student's junior year, but could be taken in a sophomore year, or for some of our more advanced students, even freshman year, you can see when we look at all students, you can see we saw some slight increases across every subgroup, but we still have much work to do in this particular area. But it is encouraging to see in this one particular area, we saw some increases. Now, the way the state will present these results is they'll present them in two different ways. You'll see them presented for Math 3 for all students, but they'll also give you results for Math 3 for those students who are a little bit more advanced and took Math 1 in the middle grades. Most of our students will take Math 1 in high school, but for those students who take Math 1 in the middle grades, The state separates those figures out, and they would call it Math 3A. Allow me to show you what those figures look like. For those students, not all students, but for students who had Math 1 in the middle grades, we saw a slight decline, but here you see we were approximately at 67 percentage point of our students college ready, and after the pandemic, we're now at about 63%. You can see across the subgroups, there were some steady declines, although you do see an increase for our Asian students, but we are seeing a slight decline across some of our subgroups. Let's now look quickly at science so we can talk about how we respond and address your questions. For science in grades 5 through 8, we were, prior to the pandemic, 66% college ready, but then after the pandemic disruption, we're at 49% college ready. In biology, we stood at 54% college ready. After the pandemic interruption, we now stand at 39%. In science in grades 5 through 8, you see from across the racial subgroups, we have a bit more of a disproportionate impact, where our Black and Hispanic students experience approximately 20 percentage points declines compared with their Asian and white peers of 10 to 12 percentage points, respectively. And you saw a slight decline, ever so slight, for our AIG students, and you saw relatively large declines for our L students and our EC students. This is a departure from the proportionate declines you saw in English language arts and mathematics. In biology, we see the same dynamic, a slight decline for our Asian students and a decline for our white students, but a decline of larger magnitude for our Black and Hispanic students. So certainly there's ground to be gained in every area. I think it's important that as we look at these figures, that we look at these through the lens of what happened across the state. What we've been presenting for you here is how did we do as a state average, the state average, and how did some of our sister districts that are large in North Carolina. We're going to share with you data that we've shared across several districts in Durham, Forsyth County, Guilford County, and Wake County. What you see is, going from left to right, our performance in English language arts in grades 3 through 8, mathematics 3 through 8, and 5th grade and 8th grade science. You can see that we're right about where the state was in 3rd grade. We're outperforming the state average in mathematics, and we're a little bit behind in science. But you can see the dramatic impacts went beyond just Mecklenburg County and stretched across the state. In English 2 and in biology, you can see that we're outperforming the state average, and we're outperforming the state average in biology as well. We are not sharing this to boast, but we're sharing this to say that there is a challenge that confronts us all, regardless of our zip code, regardless of our county, across our great state. And in mathematics, and particularly in Math 1, it reveals we have a statewide challenge. As you can see across these 5 counties, that the college ready rates are below 5% for all 5. And the state average now stands at 6.5% for Math 1 in high school. So certainly, as Mr. Winston has pointed out, we want to gain more ground than our peers, but we all have great work to do. And in Math 3, we outperform the state average and our state peers. Now, one thing that many of us grappled with during the pandemic was how valid and how reliable would our results be? Could we test enough students to get an actual picture of where they are? Though there's questions around validity and reliability given the test conditions, we did work hard, and when I say we, I really mean our principals, our teachers, and our school support staff. Allow me to pause and recognize their work. During the pandemic, they too were everyday heroes. And they too went into buildings, took care of children, were able to caretake for adults, some of them being sick themselves. We need to acknowledge their work. We need to acknowledge their work despite the shortcomings we had.